Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining our webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about instant service level monitoring for SLAs. We're joined by Hugh Bryan. He is a solutions architect at Instana, and Doug McAfee, a lead solution architect at Apica Systems. Hugh, why don't you go ahead and get started?
All right, thanks, Adrian. So welcome, everybody. Just a little bit more about me. I've been at Instana for 2.5 years, but I've been fortunate enough to work in the APM industry for probably going on 15 years. Previous installments at Wiley Technology, CA, APM, and App Dynamics. Also a software engineer before that. Doug, why don't you give us a little bit more of your background before we start?
Hello, everyone. I'm Doug McAfee. I'm a senior solutions engineer here at Apica. I've been with Apica doing synthetic monitoring and load testing performance engineering for 3 years now. Before that, I've been doing some real user monitoring for mobile, and before that, as a general consultant to the IT industry.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Doug. So, folks, we're going to jump right into it. I'm going to start off with a couple of slides, then Doug's going to finish up the slides, and then we're going to do a tag team demo. We're real excited about this. So again, we're grateful that everyone has joined. And what I want to do is talk briefly about SLAs. We're going to talk, both of us actually, we'll talk briefly about SLAs, and then we'll show the two solutions. But the thing I want to really hit home on this is, number one, we're going to give you a view of what SLAs are and how they could work and maybe should work. And then we're going to show you, if you have this solution in place and this solution in place, you literally can get instant SLAs. And that's a very powerful proposition because, and I hate to say this, it's a little bit of a cliche, but if you can't measure it, how can you manage it? And that's super, super important, especially in today's world. One of the things I've noticed over the last probably 10 years specifically is a lot of folks are throwing solutions, different kinds of technology at their business, right? At their business transformation efforts in software. And they don't know what their KPIs are. They don't really know what they don't have a good grasp of all the key critical services and their performance. So that's what we want to show you today, how you can actually do that. So let's go ahead and move forward. So the proposition that we like to make is that if you're a DevOps shop and you're building new modern microservices running in the cloud using containers and managing it with orchestration, that Instana has a great solution for you. And then we couple that with Apica, we can get to the point where once you start the managing, you can literally get to SLAs in minutes, which is really, really powerful. So that's kind of what we're presenting today. As we fall into our processes, APM is a big part of our DevOps process. So if you are, these are just examples of different technologies, but a stack with something like Jenkins and GitHub, Apica for monitoring, Chef, Puppet Labs for deployment, running with Kubernetes and containers, and monitoring with Instana, we can get to a fully automated process that includes SLA. And so that's what we're super excited about today to show you all. And the first time I saw this, even for myself, I was kind of blown away. I was like, holy smokes, we literally can do SLAs very quickly. And so let's jump right into, what are the definitions around SLA? What are the key parts that we want to address? And so we have three things. We have service level indicators, service level objectives, and then service level agreements. And at this point, I'm going to kick it over to Doug because he's got a really good way to describe this, and this is more in his wheelhouse. So Doug, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, sure thing.
All right. Let me flip you over to presenter. Let's see here.
All right, I think we're transitioned now. So yeah, these are the definitions by the book, and the book we're referencing here is Site Reliability Engineering: How Google Runs Their Production Systems. And I'm real good with the book definitions, but I'm better with some real world examples. So I'm gonna move forward with some of those and some examples pulled from the wild from our customer base. But before we move right on past this, there's also a couple of other really great topics from later chapters in the book on SRE. So if I know this is kind of something new, so if there's a question, or if you want to drop a chat or a question in the prompt about any of these, as perhaps any future webinars, definitely please do. This is really where I think Instana and Apica offer some really unique value proposition, but probably for another time. But to touch on some of these, we were just talking about the DevOps loop using CI/CD with some of the APIs within Instana and Apica. We can really gain a lot of operational efficiency and really reduce a lot of that operational overhead. Keeping things simple. We can't attain perfection until when there's nothing left to add, but rather when there's nothing left to take away. And so identifying what our core HTTP service APIs are, something that could be really interesting. Event management, kind of having a rule of thumb to reduce alert fatigue and organization of that. And then finally, I think chapter on testing here, which is really a core competency of Apica, doing load testing, and really has a lot to do with that first point about CI/CD. So wanted to mention these because there's a lot of really great topic in this, and I recommend everybody at least have a look at this in Amazon, or perhaps download to your Kindle.
That's right.
So I said I was going to bring up some real world examples. I'm going to work top down from our SLA down to our service level indicators. And what I'd really like to do is take the definitions put forth by O'Reilly in that slide previously and put them in that context. So starting with our SLA, something that we should all recognize. This is what our business teams know also very well, and this is how they hold us accountable, or at least ways that our customers hold us accountable, or perhaps ways that we hold our vendors accountable. Service level agreements define what happens when an application or service fails, and as a result, there's penalties, there's service cancellation. There could be a number of penalties or events that arise out of that. And this number is a percentage. So, for example, on the right side of my screen here, I have a widget from Apica showing the number of samples that we're taking over the course of a day, where we had some failures. And you can see we're doing a check, is what we call it, every 10 minutes. And I did the math for you down there on the bottom right, so you can keep me honest. We're doing a check every 10 minutes, and we have 5 samples where there are failures. And we take these samples and calculate our SLA percentage from this, and you can see that our average SLA for the day is 96. Now, we can go back and research this. We can look into these runs and determine just at face value, oh, maybe this was a maintenance period, and we can rule these out, or perhaps maybe drill down into the actual requests in Apica and see what happened from a client side, or perhaps even drill down further using drill down into the Instana APM and determining perhaps what's the root cause, or if we really need to, or if there's a way that we can not count these against our service level agreement, and perhaps rectify these failed samples. So this is an example here. This is our service level agreement represented as this percentage.
Hey, Doug, could you just, and also maybe just mention the difference between both the performance and the availability kind of notions and have those in mind?
Yes, so there's a few different ways that we can evaluate this, and there's availability, which is a simple up-down. There's also ways that we can do this by evaluating functionality. If we're not having the expected behavior, there's performance. Say we have a performance threshold. There's durability. I'm going to touch on this in a future slide.
Yep.
But there are a few. There's not just one way to evaluate an SLA or to evaluate a service outage. So, for example, I have here. Let's say that we have a vendor credit processing contract with our customers, and as part of that contract, there's an uptime requirement in the service agreement for 99.5% availability during critical business hours. That would be an example of a service level agreement where our customer's bottom line is affected by the operational effectiveness of our IT systems. And it doesn't necessarily need to be customers, but it could be our own. We could have our own overhead cost of internal systems, cost to us, or perhaps that there's a third-party vendor that we're keeping our own SLA on, and that affects our business's costs. So these SLAs are evaluated with service level objectives. This was availability, like I said, we'll get back to that, but the SLO is essentially your fail component. So it's the objective by which we're evaluating, like availability, performance, and so on. And these can be precise or imprecise. It really doesn't matter as long as our objectives are meaningful. So another example of this is we have a customer requiring a 20-second transaction response time for their end-to-end client interactions. And it's a bit crude, but it's using digital experience as the objective. And in a lot of cases, it's good enough. It accomplishes the business objective, making sure that their users can access their critical flows within a certain amount of time, but also kind of peripherally, it detects just inherently if there's any sort of high response times, if there's any sort of performance breach, or if it's just down, it's going to catch that availability objective as well. So our SLA is the percentage that we're evaluating. Our service level objective is our failure criteria. And then finally, our SLIs, coming down to the bottom here, these are the sets of KPIs or metrics that we're evaluating over time that we're passing and failing. And like I said, this could be availability, this could be functionality. Say we're asserting something complex, like we make a post and then a subsequent get to get a customer's account information. That could be an implicit validation of functionality, performance, latency, and there's another one, durability. For one new check that we're kind of seeing is ready for business. So it's like evaluating performance at a certain scale at the beginning of the day, making sure that we can handle the 8 a.m. Login rush or the 1 p.m. Return from lunch rush, most likely or more often on internal systems. So this is next point that I was referring to here. And so this is what I want to talk about is how we define what constitutes that service outage. It could be network, environmental, regional. The application could be down, the service is unavailable, we may be getting an incorrect reply, there's an application error. At the end of the day, these are all attributes of availability, performance, functionality, durability, and even, I want to point this out, downtime can also be categorized as an attribute itself in a disaster recovery scenario. So for example, how fast can systems heal what's the performance impact of a caching event, and so on. So each one of these can be how we constitute a service outage and how we understand what the breach of our SLA is. So moving forward here, I want to talk about how we design and iterate upon our SLAs. And once we understand how we are to measure what objectives we have, or once we agree on the related indicators to formulate our SLAs, then we can understand, negotiate, and agree upon what makes sense for our organization and ultimately what makes sense for the business. And I really recommend take a step back here. Common sense serves us well. Going back a couple of slides to my airplane, take the most common sense example and either work up from your indicators or down from the business case. But unfortunately, very often, and I see this a lot as a vendor, the SLAs that we are building towards are already predetermined, and we don't necessarily have the luxury of negotiating the SLA. And this may have been pre-negotiated by our sales team to our customers, or maybe we inherited these service level agreements from the business, from the former monitoring lead. It's a rough situation to be in, to be held to this SLA from something before. We may have better knowledge of our application footprint that we could have agreed on something better or something more realistic. But my mom always told me, no use crying over spilt milk. So turning this water into wine, this is where we can ghost bust or sort of eliminate perceived service impacts or downtime by improving the design of our monitoring. So, for example, we can keep better accountability of our vendors or vouch better reliability to our own customers, depending on how we better design these. And so there's some tools that we have to do that, from creating synthetic transactions or synthetic monitors for this. And I'm going to go back to that vendor credit example that I mentioned earlier. If we were to design something end-to-end, it's going to give us a full picture of the end-to-end transaction there. So I would use something maybe like a browser check with Selenium, or use a scripted API transaction using Apica Zebra Tester or something like that. But let's say that I'm seeing a significant slowdown in my DB queries, and maybe I'm getting all sorts of alerts because I'm over 3.5 standard deviations above the expected mean for those DB transactions. And technically, I can't get those account details, but taking into account how we evaluate our SLAs, everything could be fine, because when my users run a new transaction posting customer details for a credit check, there's actually no downtime. It's just the slow query, not necessarily getting the data into the system. So that could be a more complete picture that is actually not a breach for us, not a breach of our objective, but is a more complete picture showing us that everything is operating fine. And then there's also the alternative of running point checks or single curls or page loads on resources. And although really at Apica don't recommend using these much anymore, they do have their time and place as well. So with that, I think we're pretty much ready for the technical demo. But to kind of recap everything covered so far, Apica can provide the SLA through synthetic monitoring with sort of low friction, easy to create monitors, and we'll get into that. We'll also going to show the integration of how to instantly create these synthetic monitors to give us our SLAs from the Instana service endpoints through the integration, automatic check creation. It's going to be pretty neat to see. We'll also, this is where we'll also define sort of our service level objectives. We can generate load, do our synthetic service calls, automatic setup like I mentioned, or we can use that automatic setup as a starting point and deliberately set up more complex monitors from manual setup. And then going down further to Instana, this is where we have all of our SLIs where we can validate or drill down into the key performance indicators, see response time, call count, error rate, instance count, and validate all of the calls coming from Apica. Perhaps deep dive on them further, or see holistically, perhaps comparing, I see that my tagged synthetic traffic is having a problem, but I can isolate that to only the geolocations where my monitors are running. The rest of my users seem to be fine. So there's a lot of insights that we can get to these Apica incidents once we link them up with the details we see in Instana.
Gotcha. So now what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to let's go to Chrome. Let's see here. So now what we're going to do is jump into our demonstration, and I think what everyone will really like about this is we will have literally showing you the software in Instana. We'll discover services, and then once they're discovered, we're going to go through and generate SLA monitoring and SLA monitoring on those. And it should be pretty exciting here. So let me just do, one second. Okay, and then we do. So one of the things we have here in Instana, we're going to go through and do discovery. So all it takes is, and especially in these new orchestrated environments, we're going to be able to show you and do discovery and service naming and all of these things almost literally instantaneously. So you deploy the agent into your environment, it's going to go through and discover all of your infrastructure. From there, what we're going to do is also the containerized technology is also there. And what's great about the containerized implementations are the ability to really use the metadata and exploit it, so we can then really do all of our service monitoring instantaneously. So that's what at Instana, that's one of the things we're really super excited about. We use services as our one of our primary, the idea of a service is what we go by, right? That's our first class citizen, if you will. And what we're going to do with that is we're able to build out the entire dependency stack from the underlying host and node all the way up through the container, the process, the service, and the literal service performance. We've also added really good monitoring for things like Kubernetes and OpenShift, where we auto discover the entire cluster and have dashboards for all of the critical components. But what we really want to get to in our implementation here is our underlying services. So we go through and we'll do all this discovery, but the really important thing we want to do is get to our applications and their underlying services. So in our demo today, we're going to use, we've got a couple of demo applications, Ticket Monster and Robot Shop. But what is really powerful is we can take all of the services for a particular application and have them aggregated in our solution. Every service, we're going to capture all those key performance indicators. And what we're going to do is we're going to discover it, we're going to name it, we're going to type it, and we're going to time it. So we're going to capture all those key performance indicators. But not only that, remember, we're going to discover the service, and we're going to capture all of its endpoints. So that's the other really powerful proposition here, is that we're capturing not just the service, not just aggregating them in the into an application, but we're literally capturing all of the endpoints also. And these endpoints also get their own dashboards. So if you look across the top here, we can see we have an application. An application is made up of one or many services, and each service is made up of one or many endpoints. The other thing we like to do here with our services, though, we're also going to map out their flow automatically. We're going to capture all of their key performance indicators, as you see here. We're going to lay out the performance, error messages, log messages, and then you can always link back to the underlying infrastructure, right? So you always, these two are completely integrated, the underlying infrastructure coupled with the service monitoring. And then finally, the real highlight I like to always point out is we capture a trace on every call. So you literally can see every individual service call in Instana, and we capture all of them instantaneously. So you'll be able to see those here. And with that, that gives us the ability to do not only really good monitoring of all of these, but also getting into details and solving problems on individual cases. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road. So once we've deployed Instana and we have services discovered, now I'm going to throw it over to Doug, and what he's going to do is once you have your Apica account, we're going to and again, I'm going to say this probably 2 or 3 more times. You're literally going to get instant SLAs. So, Doug, would you like to show how to create some SLAs on these services we've automatically discovered with Instana?
Sure, I'll take control back over. And I'll pick up where we've left off here. So like we said, like we've been showing here, these services that we're automatically detecting with Instana once we have that Instana agent up and running, is we can then we've actually built an integration here which is actually going to pull from the Instana API behind the scenes and then feed that information to Apica to create synthetic monitors based off of the service calls that we're detecting. So here's the base page to begin with this. I have a invitation code that I'll enter, and then from here all I need to do is just provide a little bit of information to get started. So with this, I'm going to put in my Instana API key, my tenant. So going back to my Instana account, this is going to be that prefix to the Instana IO. It should be USPOC. And then the Apica synthetic token. So this is something that if you have an Apica synthetic account, that this belongs to your user or one of your system users. You can create one of these, and this will basically create an endpoint, or it will create a dashboard for where these synthetic monitors will be created. And then finally, I'm going to choose the host name of the service that I want to monitor. So with that, I'm actually going to pull this from my robot shop.
Yep.
1 second here. My robot shop tab just went away.
That's all right.
All right, here he is.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to put in the host name of the service. So this is the base host name that I want to create the monitors for. And then from here, I'm just going to create checks. And what's going to happen is, I should be running a test that's generating these endpoints. But anyway, it couldn't detect any right now, but that's not a problem. I'm going to pop over to my synthetic dashboard and do a refresh where I've actually created some checks previously. So a couple days ago, I've created some checks. And what it's done here for my Ticket Monster application is I've created some browser checks using some of the get endpoints here for the simple application. And what this is it really serves as a starting point for us to just get some base, some generic SLAs, and then we can actually use these to build more advanced or further synthetic monitors to create SLAs to the objectives that we were talking about previously in the slides. So
just to reiterate here, Doug, just to kind of, so what we literally did is we had Instana installed, we discovered all the services and endpoints, and then we go through, fill out a form at Apica, and we're literally generating the checks in order to create the SLAs. I just want to hammer that point home. That's right. So all of these checks were automatically created in Apica, and they're pointing to our application, which is, and we're generating all the checks and the synthetics on our particular app.
Yep, exactly. And you'll see that these synthetic checks, they all have, I mean, just base Apica functionality. What we're doing here is we're evaluating SLA percentages for every single one of these monitors that we've created. Now, typically we'd create them and leave them running 24/7 to give us, allow us to slice and dice these, you know, by hour, by day, by week, by month, by quarter, however we want to do this. We can generate reports on these and so on. So I'm going to pop over to another account that I have, which is a little bit more filled out. So this is showing a mix of some basic checks, some of the basic curls that we created for some of the our store endpoints for my Ticket Monster application. I have others as well where I've taken the base browsers and added Selenium scenarios to them. And then also one of the things that I want to show as well here is taking our tool Zebra Tester and turning those URLs into URL transactions. So those base endpoints that we're picking up from Instana, those can serve as a starting point to begin building an API transaction, and that's something that I'll do with us. But to drill down into that, what one of these looks like is I can go and look into one of these chained REST services here. I can see the performance of this over time, and then I have a pause here for a maintenance period. That's what that flat line is. And then I can go into the result of one of these. So these are all of these samples that I was showing from that screen previously. And if I look at the samples over the past 7 days, I am, based on the frequency of how often I'm running this, I'm getting about 500 samples for the week. And if I go into one of these are running every 20 minutes, half hour or so, something like that, or every hour. And I can see that I'm chaining these two together. I'm getting some information from the first request, and then doing an implicit functionality assertion by taking information from that first get and then putting it into a subsequent post request.
Nice.
So what I'm going to do now is I'll show how to build one of these using my robot shop.
And while he's doing that, I'm just going to mention a couple other things there. Don't forget too, on every one of these synthetics, we are able to capture the subsequent trace. But the nice thing is in Instana, we can actually exclude those from our actual KPIs on our dashboards. So we can opt to include or exclude synthetics from our real-time dashboards. But we're also, again, we're going to capture a trace on every call.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's a lot of there's a lot more instrumentation than what we have time to show on this webinar. And you know, with the ability to tag our synthetic transactions and run filters on those from the analyze metrics or analyze traces in Instana. There's a lot more instrumentation that we could do. This is just I'm just showing the 101 here of getting started. So I have it ready now. I'm up in our Zebra IDE tool, and this allows us, think of it like a Postman for load test or Postman for synthetic monitoring with I think really easy variable extraction. I don't need to write in JavaScript or anything like that to chain these together. So I have two requests here against my robot shop. One just hitting the home page, and another is every time I go through a checkout process the API gives me a unique user ID. And I can go in and inspect the response of this API call, and I can see that it's a very simple response, but it's giving me the user ID, the time that I made this request. It will change, it'll probably change each time. It's giving me an anonymous 80 user ID here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract this this piece of JSON to a response content, or to this piece of response content to a variable. So I'm going to add this as user ID and add this variable. So now I have a variable called user ID, which is going to change each time that I make this request. And the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to add another, just a simple GET request here, where I'm going to add a stan robot to my cart in the API. And what I need to do that is I need to make sure that I add the user ID that's been that I've recorded here. So actually, before I do this, let me come back here and rerun this call. Make sure I have a current user ID. We've gone to 108, and now I'm going to add the next URL using that anonymous 108 as our user in the URI here. So I can do a test on this, and we can see we have a 200 response, and I'll apply. So right now we just have a static, 3 static URLs going to our homepage, getting a user ID, and then adding stan to this user ID's cart. What I can do very simply here is add the variable that we've created to our URL path. And so that's what I'll do is I'll take our user ID, come here and just pick the text we want to replace in the URI and add this. So we can see here we have a notation showing an extraction and an assignment. So each time that I run this, I'm going to be generating a new user ID and adding a new stan to that new user's cart each time. And we can follow this through to logical conclusion where we can chain these URLs together manually to create a checkout process. Or if I'm not really sure of what these APIs behind the scenes of my application are, I always have the option to do record session. So actually built into the tool here is a proxy server, which allows to do a proxy recording. And I can do a record session. This could be from a mobile device. I want to catch the backend calls made from my mobile application API. Could be from a browser. Pretty much anything that we can record over proxy. In the past, we've done things like Xboxes and Rokus for media. It really could be anything. So if you don't know what those calls are behind the scenes, you could always run this recorder and detect what those are and build your own monitors using this tool.
And while you're going through there, can you just let everyone know about the robot shop, just real fast, just make a reference to that and how simple that was to get up and running and what that was when I showed it to you. Kind of give me your feedback on that.
Sure. So this is the robot shop. This is a demo application which I've deployed by container from Instana. There's a GitHub here, and I mean, if I could figure it out, anybody could figure it out. There's instructions in how to deploy that from GitHub. I used Docker. It was a very simple build for me. I just pulled it and I did a Docker compose pull from the source and a Docker compose up. It was really simple to play around with. And at the end of the day, see from the dashboard here, not just the host that I deployed the monitor to, but actually to see all of the, Docker images that are within the robot shop as well. So it's a neat application to play around with the API, which I think has been really fun to do in creating some monitors, but then also drill down into all of the
Yeah, all the
different
services underneath. So every one of these represents essentially a microservice, which is really powerful. And then that gave us the ability to, so there's APIs in there, and then Doug was able to take his integration and point it right at it, and boom.
Right. So those two APIs that I was testing was this user and this cart.
That's right. Yeah,
And
just bring up the service list over on the left there real fast so they can see that. So we have the idea of the application, and then either one is fine. Yeah, and then all the services. So I think we want to get to taking questions. Yeah, again, there's the complete list of services that, again, like to always iterate on there. We discover them, we tag them, we type them, and we time them, meaning we grab all the KPIs on those. So let's jump over to questions. I think would be appropriate. We have about 15 minutes for questions, 10 or 15 minutes. So.
All right. So the first question that we're gonna go over is, let me just pull it up. So kind of a broad question, but what are the best SLA metrics to monitor? I think that's service level indicator metrics.
So I'll hit the first part, and I'll let Doug follow up with that. So we always start with what we call the Google Golden Signals, response time, throughput, error rate, and then what we call density. I think that's right. So we capture automatically when we go discover, let's say, the RS catalog service there, or the RS rating service. You can see those on the screen, third and fourth down. We're going to have the throughput, the response time, and the error rate are captured. And then instead of the kind of density, what we have is we have all of the containers that and the performance on the containers underlying those services. So that would be the first part of the answer there. Any follow-up on that, Doug?
No, I think that's the right place to start from the KPIs, and then just iterating on that to the theme of the webinar here. Then we would, if we're building up, we'd take our indicators and then select an objective from which we hope to accomplish using those indicators, and then evaluate whether we need an SLA on that or not.
Got it. Okay.
All right. And just heads up, everyone, if you have a question, be sure to post that in the Q&A box. Next question is, will these capabilities work on traditional architectural applications?
Absolutely. So if you've got something like JBoss or Tomcat or any of the more .NET, ASP, .NET applications where we still have a HTTP request, basically. Absolutely, we will go and discover those as traditional .war in Java. We'll still discover and create services out of those and endpoints, and then of course Doug can generate. We'll still be able to generate the load against those, because this is kind of you're kind of at a higher level of abstraction when you're dealing with HTTP. So not a problem at all. Your thoughts on that, Doug?
Right. I mean, with the tools that we have, either building from a browser or building from the individual requests themselves, I mean, we can generate any sort of load against the application. We have at Apica, we kind of have it as a badge of honor. There's hasn't been a script that we haven't been able to replicate so far using the tool set. So any sort of
awesome
request that we want to make is within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and then the other part of it is, Instana can monitor, JBoss, Tomcat all day long. We auto discovered that also. So, all right. Go
ahead. I think the person that asked that had a follow-up question to your answer. They are using other synthetic monitoring systems in the market, and they're wondering what's the main advantage of using Apica with Instana.
Well,
Yeah.
obviously integration, and then go ahead, Doug.
Oh yeah, and then the other is well, first the integration, and that's being iterated upon. So there's the services that we've shown. Then there's also coming the trace information as well. So not just having the endpoints as starting points for the SLAs, but sort of building more or creating more intelligent synthetic scenarios from what's automatically detected in Instana is kind of the next stepping point from here. Also, another that we didn't really touch on is the ability to sort of configure these synthetic calls from within Instana to detect those and adding headers.
Yeah, the thing that, there were a couple of questions on, what are the main advantages, and I would say the key point between, so when you have Instana going through and doing your active monitoring, and you have Apica doing synthetics and testing, the ability to extract, that measurable SLA out is super important. Like I said at the beginning, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I wholeheartedly believe that. Just after spending a lot of time in the APM space, this notion of the number of folks that don't have a good grasp, over their hour over hour, day over day, week over week performance of their critical business systems is more rampant. I'll go out on a limb here and say, it's rampant in our industry. And I don't think, I think most folks, if they weren't in front of their boss, would probably admit it. So, getting performance monitoring and then the synthetics on there to really give you a good idea about the availability and performance of your critical business systems is huge. I can't emphasize that enough. Doug, you might have some thoughts on it. Okay. Next question, Adrian.
Yeah, so how do I get access to Apica's integration with Instana?
Yeah. Oh, sure. We actually have an endpoint set up to begin trying that out. I have it here. So all we'll need really is an invitation code. So you can reach out to sales at Apica Systems or myself to get an access code and an account with a API token. And I'm sure the same goes for Instana. All you need is the API token and the agent installed as a starting point.
That's right. And on the Instana side, if you are not a current customer, you write to our homepage. You can get a trial started. If you want to extend the trial, we're more than happy to do that. And you can have this integration running in a very short period of time.
Yep, it's just a one-time. It's a one-time enablement. So once you've triggered it, you're off to the races.
Awesome.
I saw one that caught my eye here, and it is there any limit to the number of steps to a synthetic transaction? And I'm going to say there's no hard limit, but it really kind of comes. I've answered this a couple times lately. It really comes to common sense from what you want to, what you're looking to learn from running that monitor. So you could run theoretically a 2-minute long monitor that takes to execute, but the information that you would get from that would have to be meaningful, like we were talking about in setting up the SLA. The objective has to be meaningful. So if it's an end-to-end where I need to cross multiple services, say I'm going from my account login to a third-party client, and maybe I'm making a transfer in another application, and it does take 2 minutes, and that is my service level objective of just, can I get from end to end? Then that would be the monitor. So there's no hard limit. I would say it's really up to what it's common sense of what that objective is.
Great. So let's see if we have time for another question. Guys, do you want to do a run through and see if there's any other questions that we haven't answered yet?
Yeah, I noticed there's some, I'm looking at chat, but then there's also the questions. I kind of mentioned this: if my service transfers money from one bank account to another, does the synthetic transaction from Apica actually move the money? So this is, so yes, it will if you're using real credentials. You can think of the monitor that you've queued, or the job that you queued, or the load test that you've queued. If you're providing real authentication information in the HTTP requests you're making, then you can do that. Often, they're in customers that I know of, they have they've created sort of isolated accounts. I don't want to call them service accounts because they're real accounts that are actually going to be moving money or making a transaction back and forth, and that's managed managed by a team or a person with real accounts that are actually moving real balances back and forth. So it can be done, and you can do that. It really depends on, I guess, the risk that you assume and the credentials that you are putting in the monitor, or that sort of information. So these are real requests that we're making, that I have up here. It's just what you package in them is up to you.
Good.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we are going to wrap up, unless anyone has any other questions.
Again,
thank you.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to just kind of wrap it up with the following, just because I like
sure.
Sorry, Adrian. I like to just pre-emphasize. So again, folks, the goal of today is, getting a measurement on top of our critical, business services as we go through digital transformation. Remember, once you have Instana up there monitoring and getting these first-class components, these services discovered here on the screen, we can then, and their relevant endpoints, you can literally, with the execution of a script and 5 parameters, generate instant SLAs on any of these services. And so you can get to measurement in very short order. Whereas, that's not a trivial thing to do, to have an integration between your synthetics and your APM solution. And so we think this is the whole in this case is greater than the sum of its parts. Doug, would you like to have any closing thoughts there?
I'm gonna do the same thing that you're doing. I'm gonna reiterate that all of these HTTP services that we've detected, we're automatically creating SLAs on those by essentially taking those endpoints and turning those into synthetic monitors. And we can prune that list after the fact, but it's a huge starting point from automatic detection to automatic monitor creation.
And then we had one other question, Adrian. Are we going to make this recording available at some point in the future? Or
yes, we are. So within the next few hours, the webinar will be available on demand, so you can check back on our website. We'll also send you an email with the recording for you to review any parts that you missed.
Outstanding. Yes. Thanks, Adrian.
All right. Well, from everyone here at Instana and Apica, we thank you guys for hopping on with us today. If you have any questions and we didn't answer it in detail, feel free to reach out to us. You'll have our contact information when we send out the recording. And with that, I'd like to thank you and Doug for an awesome presentation. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.